if we want to date it to the Basel Conference and the creation of the World Zionist Organization in 1897, I would say that the Palestinian resistance since then went through four main periods. The first period is from 1897 until, I would say, the British Mandate. And the British Mandate is dated from 1922, which is when Britain took over control of Palestine and the Ottoman Empire dissolved. But it's important to remember that during the Ottoman Empire, when Palestine was under the Ottoman Empire, which was from 1458 until 1918, but when the Palestinians started to be confronted with the Zionist project in 1897, there was already Palestinian and Arab concern with the Zionist project. And they were actually active in showing and talking and reaching the higher political level to protest the Zionist project. The Palestinian encounter with the Zionist project was not so much an encounter with the Jews, it was an encounter with these foreign settlers that were coming to Palestine, that built their settlement in the area of the Galilee in particular, in the northern part of Palestine. And their concern was not the fact that these people came, but above all that they were European and they did not mingle with the local population. That they wanted to be on their own and they were buying land, and once they bought the land they started excluding the Arabs. Okay? This exclusion of the Arab really happened in what's called the second Aliyah, which is in the 1910-12. Okay? So there was this little bit of concern among the peasants. But also the intellectuals, the Palestinian intellectuals, started to be concerned and were aware of the Zionist propaganda already in the 1902, 1910, and we know that in 1908, important Palestinian notables went as far as to Istanbul to talk with the Ottoman Empire, Ottoman governor, Sultan at the time, to protest the Zionist project, which they clearly see as a project of people who want to colonize the land rather than of people who wanted to settle in the land. People, the Zionist propaganda often says that there was no Palestinian resistance, they were not opposed to the Palestinian, or Arab propaganda sometimes says the Palestinians were not aware of the Zionist project. Actually, we know of a fact today that Palestinian opposition to the Zionist project made itself vocal already at the beginning of the century. And it made itself vocal in two ways. One, by Palestinian peasants protesting their expulsion, but also by Palestinian intellectual and mayor of Jerusalem going as far as to the government in Istanbul protesting the project. And it's also important to remember that the Ottoman Sultan, although he was approached by Herzl to give a home for the Jews in Palestine, he refused. And although he was the Sultan himself, so it's important to remember that also the Ottoman government was not supportive of the Zionist project. On the premise, again, that Jews are welcomed, but Zionist project is not welcomed. The turning point, of course, as you all know, is the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was a promise given by Britain in 1917, so before the First World War was over, whereby the Zionist World Organization under the direction of Weizmann, Chaim Weizmann, approached the British government and tried to lobby for a British support for the creation of a Jewish home in Palestine. And in 1917, they get an official endorsement from his king, the Majesty, the King of Britain, which in this famous declaration called the Balfour Declaration, because it was the foreign minister at the time who received this letter from the representative of the Zionist organization, in which Britain and Her Majesty, His Majesty, the King at the time, say clearly that they look in favor and support the idea of the creation of a Jewish home in Palestine. They didn't say a Jewish state. They didn't say whole of Palestine. They said they support the creation of a Jewish home in Palestine. It be understood that the civil and religious rights of the people living on the land will not be violated. It was a very important success for the World Zionist Organization, exactly 20 years after its creation, because they got the superpower of the time endorsing their national project. Britain at the time did not, and in that declaration does not talk about Palestinians or the Arab as having political rights. It talks about them only as having religious and civil rights. This is why it was such a problematic declaration from an Arab perspective and a Palestinian perspective, because it took away and did not acknowledge the indigenous people's right to self-determination. It acknowledged the Jewish people's right to self-determination as the World Zionist Organization defined it. Because the Balfour Declaration also was so intelligent, because it said, yeah, the Jews can create a home in Palestine, but it be understood that the inhabitants' civil and religious rights will not be violated, but also the Jewish right in Europe and in the West will not be violated. Which basically means if a Jew wants to remain in Britain and be British, that will be protected. The creation of a Jewish home in Palestine does not take away from the Jews outside Palestine their political rights. So it was an incredible, it's like the US today endorsing a Bosnian state. It's like the US today endorsing East Timor. You know, everybody is against it, but the superpower at the time is for it. And as soon as the Arab heard of it and the Palestinians heard of it, they were very upset and expressed their anger at this declaration in two ways. One, by massive demonstration in Palestine in 1920. One, when the British were already there and declared the mandate. But also, Palestinian politician and Arab politician went to London and discussed with the Britain about how unfair this declaration is. And they got assurances at the time that don't worry, what we mean by a state, by a home, is not a state. And what we clearly mean in it is not in the whole of Palestine, in some part. So it was meant, it was left vague. And this is very typical of all international declaration, because it's just a tool. The core issue is how, with this very important stock share, you're going to cash it in with something concrete or not. And the World Zionist Organization was very successful in taking this very important declaration and make sure that they can cash it in with the creation of a state. How did they do that? Or what I mean, I suppose you heard before how it happened, but the second phase we're entering now, which is the phase of the British mandate, where Britain comes to Palestine, take over Palestine. Britain and France divided the old Ottoman Empire into states, and they created the present boundary of Palestine, which is more or less the historical one. And the mandate clearly said that the role of Britain is not to just colonize Palestine. No. The role of Britain in Palestine, as well as in Jordan, as in Iraq, where the mandate applied, was to prepare the indigenous inhabitants for independence. The argument being that they're still not ready for independence because they don't have modern institution, modern state. But it's important to remember that. And we're going to train them until they become independent. But in that respect, in Palestine, the British had already started off on the wrong foot, because while promising that, they also promised the Zionist movement a home in Palestine. When the riots started in 1920-21, the foreign secretary at the time clearly said that what we mean by Jewish home is something still to be determined. It doesn't mean a state in Palestine, and it doesn't mean all of Palestine. Okay? And that respect was very important, because he stops the Zionist plan of saying that the boundaries of the Balfour Declaration went as far as Jordan. The other thing which is important is how you're going to now create a new government. Britain started off by talking about a one-state solution. He said, we're going to have one single government for whole of Palestine, and in this there will be equal representation between Jews, Muslim, and Arabs. Actually, the category was not Jews, Muslim, and Christian, between Jews and Arabs. And the governor at the time tried very much to sell this idea to the Palestinians, but they refused. They refused because they could not understand why 10% of the population, actually 7% of the population at the time, should have equal representation in government. Okay? And why should Hebrew, English, and Arabic become the official language when the official language of the land was Arabic? And also because they saw already from the very beginning is that the British favored much more the Western Jews than they did favor the Palestinian. So they had higher salaries in the administration, because what Britain did, the administration, the state, all had Arabs and non-Arabs in it. But it would give the Jew a higher salary than the local, on the argument that they are more educated and more sophisticated. I mean, it's a form of colonialism, of course, as you know. But the important is just to remember that in terms of administration, Britain tried to make a single administration and tried to do a single state. And the position of the Palestinian was, we want to be all Palestinian. We don't want to be categorized into Christian, Muslim, and Jew. The Zionists, of course, were not interested in that, because the Zionists from early on wanted a separate state. They did not want to share the land with the people. They wanted the land just for themselves. And what Britain does during this time, favor the World Zionist Organization, allow Jewish immigration, allow the underground Zionist organization, turn a blind eye on whether the World Zionist Organization was bringing in arms or not, while forbidding the Arabs from having any arms. And what we start early on having, we're starting to have, again, Palestinian opposition at the elite level, but important grassroots, peasants and workers' opposition to the Zionist project. And we see that in two major events. One is the riots of 1921, and then there's a major riot in 1929, in which the last Jewish community of Hebron actually left or was expelled. And was important, the event, because it marked the final attempt by Britain to deal with Palestine as a single entity, and started dealing with the Arabs on one side and the Zionists on the other. Okay? And that riot was important because it was massive demonstration in Hebron, in Jerusalem, in Safad, in Jaffa, a number of places where the Palestinians said, we are against Jewish Zionist immigration. Again, the problem was not the Jews as Jews, the problem was there are these colonizers coming, expelling the indigenous people from the land, taking their land, although it was through sale, because it was absentee law that sold the land to the Jewish World Zionist Organization. But the ones who were getting displaced were the peasants who always worked on that land, because the World Zionist Organization and the Jewish agency, or the Jewish government in Palestine at the time, took a decision, because of the strong labor union they had, not to rely on Arab labor. So the Palestinians not only saw their land being taken away from them, but also their jobs taken away from them. And Britain sends a number of commissioners to come and study the situation and say what to do about it. And they reported in a number of reports that the problem was a problem of land, and problem of poverty, a problem of unequal development, and bias, British bias towards the World Zionist project, which is, in their view, was wrong. So we do have a number of reports coming up by the British saying, this is an Arab state, more or less, Jewish immigration should be minimized, or in any way slowed down, and the land issue has to be addressed. The Zionists do not like it at all. They mobilize the government against it. And then the major event that happens, again, we have another major revolt that actually takes place by the Palestinians in 1936. It's a very important revolt because it was really the first, not just a riot, it was the first really intifada that happens in the Palestinian community, 1936. It was initiated and led by a guy called Izzuddin al-Qassam. So when you're hearing of the Qassam rockets, when you hear of the Qassam brigades, they are in memory of this person who was actually originally Syrian and who lived in Palestine and was very, very worried about increasing Jewish immigration into Palestine and their appropriation of Palestinian land and of Palestinian property. And he started the revolt, and the revolt lasted for 3 years, in which the Palestinians declared strikes in major cities, in which you had massive demonstration. It was really a grassroots organization, and the elite, the Palestinian elite at the time, joined in the bandwagon, adopted it afterwards, and tried to force British hand into giving some concession, which included stopping the immigration and considering Palestinian political rights. But what happens during this, so that it goes from 1936 until 1939. But also Britain at the time comes along with a guy called Mr. Peel, Sir Peel, and proposes a solution to the conflict, which is called the Peel Commission proposal. And it was the first partition plan. British policy until 1937 was the solution to Palestine was a single state in which Jews and Arab ruled together. Palestinian position was, we don't want to be treated as Jews, Christian, and Muslim. We want to be treated as Palestinians. Okay? What Britain then does is say, okay, what we're going to propose is partition. The British, both parties rejected it, but the Second World War erupts, and it manages to calm the Arabs by giving them promises that at the end of the war, there will be one single Palestinian state, okay, and there will be restriction on Jewish immigration. As you know, concern was not the fact that these people came, but above all that they were European and they did not mingle with the local population. That they wanted to be on their own, and they were buying land, and once they bought the land, they started excluding the Arabs. Okay? This exclusion of the Arab really happened in what's called the Second Aliyah, which is in the 1910-12. Okay? So there was this little bit of concern among the peasants. If we want to date it to the Basel Conference and the creation of the World Zionist Organization in 1897, I would say that the Palestinian resistance since then went through four main periods. The first period is from 1897 until, I would say, the British Mandate. And the British Mandate is dated from 1922, which is concerned with the Zionist project. And they were actually active in showing and talking and reaching the higher political level to protest the Zionist project. The Palestinian encounter with the Zionist project was not so much an encounter with the Jews, it was an encounter with these foreign settlers that were coming to Palestine, that built their settlement in the area of the Galilee in particular, in the northern part of Palestine. And but also the intellectuals, the Palestinian intellectuals, started to be concerned and were aware of the Zionist propaganda already in the 1902, 1910, and we know that in 1908, important Palestinian notables went as far as to Istanbul to talk with the Ottoman Empire, Ottoman governor, Sultan at the time, to protest the Zionist project, which when Britain took over control of Palestine and the Ottoman Empire dissolved. But it's important to remember that during the Ottoman Empire, when Palestine was under the Ottoman Empire, which was from 1458 until 1918, but when the Palestinians started to be confronted with the Zionist project in 1897, there was already Palestinian and Arab